Hey everyone, happy Friday. We made it to Friday. I'm really struggling today. I hope you are not able to tell. I'm Amy Novakovich, CEO and Certified Financial Planner at Nova Wealth Management. I'm here today with one of our amazing wealth advisors, Ryan Wilson.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
First time on live. Are you nervous?
Not nervous, just not used to seeing myself
Hey
on
guys.
the screen.
So follow us on Twitter at Nova Wealth Management. Management's abbreviated MGMT. Check out our Instagram at Nova Wealth Management. Also on our YouTube channel, we have some different things on there that isn't on Instagram and isn't on the live. So check out our YouTube channel. This is the show. This is Finance Friday. We're also going to post it on our podcast is the word I'm looking for. See, I'm really tired. I'm gonna be struggling.
You got it. You
Okay.
can do it.
On our podcast on iTunes, the Nova Wealth Show. But today we want to motivate you a little bit. Money, sometimes people feel like we're, something that you don't want to hear. Like we're lecturing, I don't want to be told what to do with my money.
Right.
So today we're hoping to motivate you because risk is like a dirty word. Like I don't like risk. I don't want to take risk. But we're going to talk about risks today that are actually worth taking.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
We have several to talk about. And actually Ryan and I disagree on several things. Damn, I'm already playing with my hair.
Yeah.
I got to stop it. Hey, Tamara, thanks for joining. She might be in the other office. So the first thing I want to talk about is how do you evaluate taking a risk? How do you really sit back and say, is this a risk worth taking? Like, I don't want to be impulsive. That's one of the first things.
Right. Well, I think to clarify that a little bit, because there's probably people out there that are sitting there going like, well, they're thinking about, all the motivational things they've seen where it's like, the world is your oyster. And so if you are going to evaluate risk, if you're not going to be impulsive in risk, then it's not risk. That's what people are probably thinking. So why can it still be considered risk if you're going to evaluate and not be impulsive?
Well, but you also, the whole point of risk is reward. You have to weigh out the reward. Oh God, there's a delay. You have to weigh out the risk and the reward. So if you say, like, everybody talks about the risk because of the negative side, but what is the downside? What's the risk? But what is the reward? Yeah. So that's why I wanted to motivate you today, is because we want to encourage you to check out the reward. Hey, Brian, thanks for joining. We want to talk about how do you evaluate the reward? How do you evaluate your return? And then is it worth shooting for that?
So would you say then, like, the impulsiveness is not really being
rude,
not really being risky, but more just being, for a lack of a better term, maybe just irresponsible?
Yeah.
So the people that are like, just jump off a cliff, go do it just because you need to do it, that wouldn't be necessarily risk. It is, but it's not the risk you're talking about.
The risk is you're dying.
Right, but like to just go and leap of faith.
And what's the reward in that? That's more like a rush, right, instead of risk.
Okay. I'm wanting you to clarify that. That's all.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't saying I was disagreeing with you.
There are certainly things out there that are more of like the rush. Like you do things for the rush of it. Like I kind of feel like buying a penny stock. Like I have had so many calls lately, and maybe we need to talk about it again, but like on marijuana stocks. We get so many people asking us about marijuana stocks. Like, should I buy marijuana stocks? And I almost feel like it's so hard to evaluate the risk and the reward that it's more about the rush.
Right.
It's more about buying it low and just seeing it like pop, 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 like just going crazy. And then you never know when to sell it. And then it's a matter of if you can sell it. We had that situation where you couldn't even get out because they halted the stock. So it's more about the rush. Like I think you have to evaluate, is it a rush or is it an actual risk with money?
Right. So rush being more emotional, risk is something that you think about and you can kind of learn, educate, which is something else we want to talk about, is to educate yourself about a risk in order to decide whether or not to take the risk. Right.
So you have to, when you're thinking about taking a risk, and one of the things the analogy we really think is easy for people to relate to is real estate, like buying real estate. So if I'm going to buy a home, and actually Ryan has been talking about this for himself, you think you're going to buy in like a year, right?
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about buying or renting, you think, is it worth the risk, right? And I think a good place to start is weighing out the good and the bad of every decision. So you actually list out the good old-fashioned pros and cons. But then you have to branch out beyond just that initial list. You have to go through each con and say, well, how could this be turned around? What's the best case and what's the worst case of each con? It doesn't just stop at the list of, what's good and what's bad.
Right. Yeah. So like,
does that make sense?
Yeah. So risk isn't as much about like whether or not to do, well, it is about whether or not to do it, but it's informing yourself, because a risk is only risky if you don't know what the possible outcomes are. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Planning for it. Like
Right.
you've already prepared for it.
Right. And also knowing, like educating
That's
yourself
what scares
on the good
people
and bad.
away from buying though. Like that's what scares people away from buying is they feel like I don't know the outcome, so I just want to rent. And I feel like it needs to be the opposite.
Right. And because not knowing the outcome is just being lazy. Like you don't want to sit down and say, well, what if I do this? What is going to be the outcome? Here can be the good and here can be the bad, and kind of going through and educating yourself on whether or not to do it, because something is only like the risk is only scary if you don't know, because if you know what the good and the bad can be and you're able to take on the bad, then risk is just, it has a negative connotation.
But
for no
what's the
reason.
definition of how can I take on the bad? Like, okay, let's forget about real estate for one
Planning,
minute.
like we talked about.
Right.
Like we talked about. So something that we, in order to be able to take on good risk, we talked about before we came on, the idea that if you've already planned and you have a path in place of, you know, say you're planning for retirement, if you already have where you're contributing and you have a kind of set number where you need to know you get to, you can deviate with the discretionary funds you have, because you already know you're going to be safe. You've got the golden egg that you have sitting there, so you can take on something that is risky. I just think risk is just such a negative connotation, because when you think risk, it's like, ooh, I don't want to do that. Or like the, you know, thrill seekers are like, yeah, I want to do that. But the risk is more just
that's rush.
Right. And that's where it's just kind of not what it's meant to be. It's just kind of misunderstood, I guess.
Yeah, because if you actually sit back and say, okay, I'm a business owner and I want to know whether to evaluate, I'm in a lot of debt, but should I invest in a new building? You know, should I invest in an employee? I get that all the time, that question of, if you're self-employed, when do I hire? You know, when do I take on that quote unquote risk, right? So how do I evaluate that? Well, you have to evaluate, first of all, how much time and how many dollars will it take before you break even? I'll say that again. How much time and how many dollars before you break even? So you can actually go back and relate this to the real estate example of how much time and how many dollars until you break even on all the rent that you've been paying. We talked about this. When you buy, your first year is pretty much all interest.
Right.
So people say, oh, I should rent over buying because my first year is interest anyways.
But then you're just compounding
right.
and adding years on.
Yes.
And I think
because now you've rented for a year because you waited, and then when you buy anyways, it's still going to be a year of interest. So now you still just added on a year.
Right. So if you're planning on moving every year, like if you're just out of college and you're kind of getting figured out, you might want to rent for a little while because you're not sure where you're going to be. You could be in a different state. You could be in a different country. And so that's evaluating the risk. Like if you were to pay a year of interest and then have to sell a house, well, then that's a little bit of a risk that you might not want to take.
That's a risk because it could appreciate or depreciate.
Yeah,
but then you have to
enough.
Say what's worst case scenario versus what's best case scenario.
Right.
Because a lot of people will look at risk through a filter.
Right. So to kind of now to application, Tamara said, you know, how do we analyze it? So do you want to kind of show just a quick, maybe a couple little offshoots of your map?
Yeah, I do.
So that you can see.
Where's the marker
though?
over there? Is that a whiteboard marker? Because last time I used it.
It is. Yeah, that's smart.
I know. Okay. So what I'll do is, should we do like, I think we can both.
Vanna White style?
Yeah, Vanna White. Actually, I'm going to go over here. So if we're going to buy a home, right? What's two ways this can go? The home value can go down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the value can go up. Okay, if the value goes up or goes down, what do? Well, I still have a loan on it and I might lose money. If the value goes down, what's another scenario? And if the value goes down, I could rent it.
Yeah.
Hence making you money. So do you see what I mean? You branch out. You don't just go pros, cons. Then you have to make a branch out through every single decision. So value goes up, then what? You could also rent, you could sell, you could hold it, but then the value could go down. So then I try to say, once you've got all this mapped out of every decision, you follow the most likely path and see where the end gets you. This is actually just an easy exercise. If it is halfway up, then it is neither up or down. Thanks, Ryan. That's good. If it is halfway, so like here.
But halfway up to what? We don't have
I think it's just being smart. If it's halfway, okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you could rent it out or hold it. So you could do every scenario you want, and then you just map through the most likely scenario until you get to the end, and then you say, is it worth it? What this is most likely. Then, so you do most likely, that stands for most likely. And then you do worst case.
Right.
So then you weigh out. You say, can I afford to do worst case in the event that worst case happens versus the most likely? The most likely is obviously the path that you think it's the way it's going to go down, but you have to weigh out worst case.
Well, I think probably the annoying thing would be just that it takes time. And that's what I think the bottom line is, that you cannot just take and say, I want to buy a house or I want to buy a car. That's
impulsive. That's the first thing I said.
Being irresponsible with the money. Now, can it work out? Sure.
Good.
Yeah, but it's a flip of a coin at that point. But I think at the end of the day, too, is when you look at it, you also have to take in opportunity cost. So the longer you sit and wait and think about it,
it's a great point.
The longer you're losing opportunity. You're not going to make the money. Maybe the market's going up, or
that's
the
so
housing
good,
market's
because
going up.
how many of you out there sit on a decision? I mean, it's like I just had somebody today. I think I told you, an employee trying to decide if they should even enroll in their 401k or not.
Right.
It's like, meanwhile, you're losing a 4% match. Yeah. Thousands of dollars on a salary of about $100,000. You're talking $4,000.
Yeah.
Just saying bye to it, just because you're like thinking about it. I mean, you're just wasting time. Again, this is the opportunity cost. Now, how much time does it take you to make back that exact dollar?
Well, and that's something that we're talking about is one of our good risks is to, if you are part of a 401k and you have a match, like that is, yes, there's a risk because you don't have that income that you're putting in to get matched, but at the same time, you're getting extra, your employer's matching that, and so you're almost getting extra income, more or less.
Is that a risk, though? Because couldn't you evaluate your finances to see if you can even afford it? See, that goes back to the laziness component.
Right, so but the risk,
and I know everybody hates the word budget. It's like, oh, don't talk to me about a budget.
Right.
It's like, okay, call it your financial routine. Like, you got to have some sort of routine.
So the risk would be whether or not that is the risk. So that's what I'm saying is risk really isn't a thing if it is evaluated. Because you know what the outcomes can be. So risk. And
there's the motivation piece. It only took us how many minutes? 11 minutes to get to the motivation piece.
And so I always say, which everyone's probably heard out there, is you miss every shot you don't take. So I'm not saying take every shot.
Put that in the comments,
because
Tamara.
you can't.
You miss every shot you don't take.
And so if you're sitting there and you're waiting to make a decision, or you're just wanting to go through this, but you get halfway through and you're like, it doesn't seem worth it. I don't know. Your time isn't valuable enough to go through that. Then you're going to miss out because you missed the shot that you didn't take.
I think
you're 100% missing it.
It's also about, this is just money wise. This isn't just talking risks, in general, but money wise, are you giving yourself to build assets? Are you giving yourself, I'm stealing that saying, by the way. I know, right? With your kids. He's got all these kids.
Nice.
But I mean, are you taking a risk in renting? Not really, other than you're not building assets. Like, it's kind of.
Right. And that's where it's hard. We're talking about risk, so I'm not trying to downplay risk, but it's not risk if the risk would only be risk if you don't know that. The outcome. Like if you rent, what are the outcomes they can be? You aren't going to own, so you don't have equity that you can build, but you have more liquidity, so to speak, right? You can move, you can get up and go. So what's the risk in there? I guess you can consider both of those sides risk technically, because you're going to.
I guess it's how you define risk, because I'm feeling like not building your assets. Like at some point when we become adults.
Okay, wrap it up.
Why?
Because we're
leaving?
Yeah, we're wrapping it up.
Oh, okay. Jim just came in and told us to wrap it up. It's 13 minutes. We're not done. Anyway, Jim, go away. See that Jim doesn't want to do these, so he doesn't get to have a say. What was I saying? See, now I got off. Oh, no. Oh, assets, building assets. At some point, we have to start building assets. So I feel like that's a great risk to take. Look, if you're trying to build your business, or we talk about school, like if you're trying to invest in yourself, I mean, these are all risks, right? These are all risks that are awesome. They're really, it's a good risk to take because you're attempting to move yourself towards financial freedom. The definition of financial freedom is to have all your assets, pay for your living so you can do what you want. You're financially free. So I want to encourage you to actually evaluate those risks. The way we talked about, if you need help, reach out to us. But definitely, if you're trying to build assets or build your business, a lot of times those are the risks that are worth taking if there's a chance that you will increase revenue or you will increase your balance sheet or increase your income. You just have to evaluate the risks.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think those are definitely worth taking. I know those are definitely worth taking. Another one that we talked about is investing. When's the perfect time to invest? So, is it a risk to just start investing no matter what the market is doing?
Right.
Is that a risk? Because I will tell you, with the market being down 7%, well, actually, I think the market rallied back at the end of the day, but it's between 6 and 7%-ish in the last couple of weeks. So does that mean you shouldn't have invested a month ago? Like you shouldn't have just started investing? You should have waited for this pullback?
Well, I think that's where it comes down to, like, there's no perfect time.
No,
right. Like you can always find an excuse to not get in. Like now it's like, oh, well, it's down. Is it going to go down further? That could be you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
but that's
the
also
mindset.
why you could just do it in chunks. Like there's ways to plan around that too.
Right.
So you could just do it in chunks, and that way when the market does go down, you didn't put everything in at once. You can just put it in chunks. And therefore, that's another risk that I say I'm willing to take. You've got to start investing to try to make money on your money. You got to use other people's money to make money.
Right.
And that's why investing.
And so it's a good investment, and you're looking, a little bit further down the line for that.
For sure.
Yeah.
So for those of you that have just joined, or we will, I guess, just wrap it up here, but we're talking about risks that are worth taking. So we talked about, to evaluate a risk, you need to know exactly how much time and how much money it will take. And if that means calculating, like for instance, if it's a business, how many clients will it take for you to make back that money? How much time will it take for you to get those clients? So that's how you evaluate the risk, how much time, how much money, right? Oh, we've got some more comments coming in. And then you can map it out. Like we mentioned the map. We did this map reel here, this map exercise. If you missed it, you can go back. But every route that can be taken, every decision has a good and a bad and different possible scenarios. And then map it out. What's the most likely scenario? And then map it out what's worst case, and can you afford worst case? And if it's moving you towards gaining assets and gaining your balance sheet, I think that's risks worth taking. We're talking about real estate. We're talking about investing. We're talking about a 401k match.
Right.
Things like this that build you towards financial freedom. I think that's definitely an awesome way to take quote unquote risk.
Right.
All right. So any last thing you want to add? I feel like this was a good discussion.
Yeah.
We did it in 17 minutes, although it's not like 3 minutes, like you said.
But I
Brian's
think we
like social
packed it in
media
pretty
millennial here, like, oh, you got to do this and you got to do this. Thanks for joining us. Share this out if you found it valuable, and join us next week on Finance Friday. Thanks, guys. Have an awesome weekend.